It was always known that this building was a USO club.
This building housed an emotion and a feeling of patriotism that is fairly rare now.
2016 is our 75th anniversary of the building.
If there's any phrase that describes the Community Arts Center, along with being a historic treasure, it's that we're a multi-use facility.
As an arts center, as a community center, it's still a building that brings generations together. When men and women fought in World War II, they weren't just defending their country. They were fighting for a way of life to preserve and perpetuate all of the values of their society, which included their hopes for their children and for the future. That's what they did at the time, and that's what this building has been doing ever since.
We gave up a heck of a lot during World War II to win that war.
Hannah Block was one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life.
She was the youngest girl in the family, and she early on demonstrated that she had a lot of musical ability.
I can't ever remember not playing a piano. My sister said I've been picking out tunes on the piano since I was 18 months old.
By the time she graduated high school, she was pretty talented, and so they decided to send her to Peabody Conservatory.
I went to Peabody in in Baltimore, and I ran away with a band. My mother came up to Boston and took me home.
Finally ended up in New York.
And they needed a singer at #1 Fifth Avenue.
He saw in there where Nina Rhodes was performing at #1 Fifth Avenue, which was sort of an upscale piano bar.
I met him at 7 o'clock. I sang in the 9 o'clock show. 11 o'clock, he proposed to me.
Well, she thought he was some kind of nutcase, and she talked to him for an hour, and he was asking her to marry him.
6 months later, I was married to him.
I think many people can imagine what it was like for a woman who had been living the New York life to move to Wilmington. And then the Second World War came along, and that changed everything.
The USO was created in the spring of 1941. That's actually before the United States became involved in World War II. Tens of thousands of servicemen were coming to Wilmington during this period. The USO was a public-private partnership. It was formed by 6 individual charitable agencies that pooled their military outreach operations to form the new organization. The initials USO stood for United Service Organizations, and the federal government agreed that it would provide the money for constructing facilities. In Wilmington, for example, at the time this building was built, it was the largest public assembly building anywhere in the city. Today, these buildings are quite rare. They were used up and thrown away. In the course of my research, I have discovered 14 of them that are still standing. This whole block was an area of the downtown that back in the 19th century had been residential in nature. There are still homes right across the street and in the next block. It was in the process of turning commercial by the middle of the 20th century. So the federal government scouted out the location. They decided that this would be an appropriate location, and so they appealed to the city and county, which at that time were in joint partnership with one another, to purchase the land.
I well remember when this building was built and dedicated in December of 1941.
The scale of military training in this area had simply exploded, and by 1943 it was reaching its peak. The attendance in this building at that time was 94,500 per month.
Downstairs is where they slept. And it got to the point that they were sleeping on the floors. You had to help these boys. It wasn't easy being a soldier.
As Mrs. World War II, Wilmington was the matriarch of the festivities in this building.
She would, of course, have these dances down here. And then she would get involved with theatrical productions, entertaining soldiers, trying to buck up their morale.
It was in 41. And this one was really the first one to be built. They had a piano near the fireplace. That was my job.
And
I played piano until I was blue in the face. Everybody had that little thing to do.
And the piano she played on to entertain the soldiers is one of our museum pieces here.
The USO Club actually survived the war by about 8 months. It didn't close until the summer of 1946.
The building then, after the war, was called the Community Arts Center.
By the early 1990s, when this building was 50 years old, it had reached the stage that most old buildings reach sooner or later.
It is sort of getting in creaky shape. It needed some work.
At that time, certain elements in the city thought that it would be a very good idea to replace it with some other building that would serve an equally good public purpose.
We were quite skeptical over the future of the building.
The movement to save the building had grown so strong that there was very little chance of that succeeding.
In 2005, the City Council voted to renovate and restore the building.
There was also a resolution in the City Council, which was passed unanimously, to rename it in honor of Hannah Block.
I think she was very flattered, and I was too, because I felt like it was really a fitting finale.
The most interesting part of managing this building is honoring its history, preserving its history for the community, and making it accessible to so many groups that use the building.
When I graduated high school, my mom surprised me with this blanket. It's not all of them, it's some of them, some of the shows I did here, and it just means a lot to me. I've done tons of shows here.
It was, growing up, you know, there's so many things you could do with all the idle time that you possibly have in Wilmington. And knowing that it was a USO building to begin with, I definitely had that semblance of treading on something fairly historic and monumental.
The original USO, there were dances here, and so I think that started its tradition of being beloved by community members.